Alright, let's actually take a look at what is best in slot now that we have the Triyal Augments. That might affect what we actually want to go for here. Because before, XD, Gigasmastic, Gladiasoul, Grand Dreadkeeper, Hakavir, Domina, and Lux Half Finale were the best in slots. But these Trials might change it up because they're more potency than Grand Dreadkeeper and the Hakavir Domina, but they don't have the floor potency, so we're going to have to see what kind of thresholds would make it best in slot if it even can. So we'll have a sheet with this as our best in slot on all pieces. I don't know if they have that already. Okay, so they do have that already. And we'll have the Anya armor. It looks like they already got that. Maxed out add-on skills, because at this point, getting so many Master Cubes, getting 20s is relatively easy. Alright, so then we'll make a copy of this. Copy of copy, yes. Copy of the copy of the copy. And this build would have the Triyal Augments over top the Grand Dreadkeeper and the Hakavir Domina. And the best ones that we can actually put on, at least in my opinion, is the Guaro and the Wardrow Triyal. So we'll copy paste this into all of our pieces. Okay, and then what is our classes? What do they have it set up as? Ranger and Slayer sub. So this is with Slayer sub active. And let's just compare the numbers. So what we want to look at is way over here. So at the Rayar 80% damage RPAs portion, no Fixa is 6583.81. And then for the Trial version, it is 6482.63. So that is like 100 less. So the previous best in slot is winning there because of the floor potency being better with like a no fixa, but higher potency augments get better with more crit rate. So now we should probably see with Fatale on how that actually compares. So let's look at, was it the second one? So Fatale for the previous best in slot at Fix of 5 is 7225.13. And for Triyal, it is 7304.64. So it looks like the Triyal does trump over the previous best in slot. So, like, Grand Dreadkeeper and Hakavir Domina you want to get rid of if you have a Fatale that high. For Fatale 4, it also looks like it is the case because the Triyal is higher by about 70 points here. Fatale 3, 7137, 7192. So even Fatale 3 is better. Fatale 2, though, 7117. App's better there, too. And then it's just slightly better with Triyal over the previous best in slots. So they're almost like on par. It's only a difference of like, what, 13? So it looks like if you do have Fatale and have Slayer sub for your Rayar, Triyal is just better. Triyal is just better for DPS. But you do gotta consider the drawbacks of using Triyal still. Like, for that little bit of extra damage on Fatale 1, for instance, I think it would be better to have the previous best in slot still because you're getting the sub-stat bonuses and not getting any of the drawbacks, like taking way more damage, getting like more status effects, and then also you are getting more like photon points, damage resistance, and health from like the Grand Dreadkeeper or Hakavir Domina, while you're getting none of that on the Trials. But let's see with no Slayer whatsoever. Let's see with like non-Slayer sub. If Triyal can beat it out with just Fatale that way. We'll just put like Hunter sub. Do the same for this one. Hunter. Okay, so Triyal gets up to 7117 at Fatale 5. And the Grand Dreadkeeper 1 gets up to 79.37. So even if you don't have Slayer sub, the Triyal is better at a Fatale that high. It actually switches over when you get to Fatale 2. So if you have Fatale 2, though, Grand Dreadkeeper and High Dominant are better for you. So what does Fatale 2 actually get to in terms of crit rate? As Fatale 3. So Fatale 3 gets to 19%. Fatale 2 gets to 17%. Okay. So what's my total crit rate then? Because that extra little bit from Fatale 2 to Fatale 3 is making that difference. So that's where our threshold lies. I think this is it. This is our total crit rate. So let me put on Fatale 2. Okay, so that doesn't reflect in here, though. So this is just coming from our class, like skills or other modifiers. I think there's also another thing that gives us a little bit extra crit rate for some reason. Yeah, this Flugelgard buff effect. I'm gonna tag that off because you don't always have the Flugelgard thing going. Okay, so that is reflected there, and then I'll do the same thing for this sheet. So we can get like a more accurate reading of that. Because the way that they do the Flugelgard buff for this damage sheet isn't exactly correct, I don't think. They did it like in a weird way. So yeah, 15%. So that's accurate because you get 10% from your add-on skills if you have maxed out Braver, and then you get 5% by default for most weapons. So there's the 15. Okay, so it makes sense. And then we have Fatale 2. Okay, so let's look again at the numbers. So Fatale 2 on the Grand Treadkeeper is 6836.45 without the Flugelgard buff. And then for this one, it is 6806.45. Okay. So yeah, that's where the Grand Dread and Kavar Domino wins. For Fatale 3 on Triyal, 6881. And then on the Grand Dread and High Kavar, it's 6894. So yeah, that's a little bit that we were getting from the Flugelgard buff that I turned off. Actually made Fatale 3 win for the Grand Dread and High Kavar. So having that on, like if you actually had the Flugelgard, then Fatale 3 would lose for this one, and then Triyal would win. Okay, so I think what Fatale 4, 69.53, and then Fatale 4 for the Triyal is 69.55. That's pretty close. That is really close. So I think the thresholds. Yeah, so Fatale 4. The threshold of crit rate that you need is 15% from your base and then 21% from other sources. So the 10% from add-on, 5% innate from just the weapon itself, and 21% from just whatever you can get it from. So the Rayar at Fatale 4, through other Slayer buffs, like having it as a subclass or as a main class to give you extra crit rates, so you don't need as high of a Fatale. So I think that is where it really is. But if you do have the full Flugelgard buff going, that's going to change it a little bit, because you do get some crit rates from having that. I believe it's like 5% if like 3 buffs are stacked. That would change it up a little bit for certain fights if you can get that buff. But just to double check that theory, let me put back on Slayer sub for both of these. Slayer sub. So that gives us another 5% crit rate, right? So then, because Fatale 4 was 21%, but now we're getting the 5 from here, threshold should now lower to going to be about Fatale 2 is my guess. Because that's at 17, which is 4% lower. But Fatale 1's like way too much of a drop. So let's actually see if I'm correct. So Fatale 2, 69.82 on the Grand Dreadkeeper build. And then for Triyal, it is 69.93. So yes, the Triyal build does win because it meets that threshold. But at Fatale 1, for Triyal, it's 68.81. And then the Grand Dread is at 68.94. So then the Grand Dread wins because it's not meeting the threshold there. Then for the final test of this, I wanted to do Slayer main, but it should have the same principle. So let me put Hunter sub, Slayer main. I do the same thing for this page. Okay, so with Slayer main, you can get a lot more crit range from a whole bunch of different sources. The way that they have it here is that you get 25%. Because there's the 2 passive skills, but also other active skills that you could have, which we'll just have up for this instance. So because it's that high, I don't even know if you need Fatale, like, at all. I think it'd be very close. So let's compare no fixes for this, then. Let's compare no fixes. So the Grand Dreads is 7115.29 at no fixa for Rayar. And then for the Triyal, it is 7153. Okay, so in this case, Triyal wins. So I guess with Slayer, no matter what fixa you have, Triyal is going to be the best in slot. No matter what, over Grand Dreads and High Caveira Domina. The rest of the best in slot Augs from this build just have higher potency, like XD. Orgigas Mastery is the exact same, but it has positive stats. Gladius Soul is higher. Lux Halfinale is higher, so keep those. But yeah, Triyal, if you're playing Slayer, is going to trump these two, specifically for doing more damage. I would say once you hit 40%, then you go for Triyal. Is there any way that I can actually just, like, manually lower this? I guess I could. Let me do some weird stuff. Okay, I can do it this way. Let me lower ever so slowly the passives to not give as much. Let's do this to 5. That's at 37.5%. Let's do 5 over here. 37.5% for both sides. Triyal at no fix on a Slayer main would be 7059.98. And then Grand Dread would be 7042.09. So Triyal would still win even with that decrease. I just do absolute 0 there. Make it 35% crit rate. Because the Grand Dread win in that case, 69.68. The Triyal is 69.66. Okay, so the Grand Dread wins just slightly. So 35%. So that'd be like if you didn't have your one active skill from Slayer going, pretty much. Because I'm sure it includes, what is the skill called? The Unleash Rage effect that gives you 5% critical hit rates. I'm sure in that damage sheet it's active for Slayer, like for Slayer mains. No, here it is. Unleash Rage. Yeah, so that is just active. So I guess like in a different way, I could just have the passive still going to 15 and it would do the same thing if I just turn that to nothing. Put that to 0. It should see the same exact results of Grand Dread being better. That to 0. And this back to 15. So, like, if you just so happen to not have the active skill going yet, or didn't have it up, yeah, no fixa 69.66. No fixa for Grand Dread 69.68. So, yeah, the same kind of situation. But, yeah, if you had a fixa, though, like a fixa Fatale, the Triyal's just going to win, like, automatically with Slayer main. Like, no matter what. It's just going to win. Interestingly enough, Fatale, now that Triyals are out, Fatale's actually better. Now that Triyals are out, Fatale's actually better for Slayer mains over Termina. As long as you get to Fatale 5. If you have Fatale 4 or lower, Termina's going to beat it in its respective levels, but that just gets a little bit extra over Termina in this case for its average DPS. And I would say the Fatale would be more consistent than Termina, just like in reality, because this is causing more crits, but this Termina is relying on crits to happen to get its extra damage. Like, we already know on Slayer that's already a good chance, but, Fatale just makes it more likely, like way more likely to get crits, so it makes it more consistent. Yeah, you are right, I see. You do gotta consider if the enemy is downed, because if you do have the add-on skill for Slayer, you get more crit rate on downs. But I would say for most of the fight, the enemy's not downed. So this is just, like, better overall DPS for just when it's up. For downs, though, I guess we can just check that real quick, just to check that scenario. Let me just check mark this downed state. And do that the same for this sheet. Yeah, number's gonna be very different. All the extra damage you get from downs. So yeah, Triyal, of course, just overall winning. I mean, it's even almost on par for no Fixa with the previous best in slot because of just like how much crit rate you get from the downs once you max out the Slayer add-on skill. That is with Slayer sub, by the way. If you're not using Slayer sub, then I think it's just kind of the same situation. Yes, still, if you have a Fatale of any kind, even Fatale 1, then on downs, the Triyal's gonna win. Long story short, Slayer mains should be using Triyal pretty much no matter what, since they get a lot of crit rate. For Slayer subs, it'd be Fatale 2, and then for not using Slayer at all, you probably want Fatale 4. And that is also including, once again, maxed out crit rates from the Braver add-on skill. If you don't have that, then it's going to be even more Fatale that you need if you're not playing Slayer. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. That's how the best in slot is now. So, Rayar, XD, Giga Smash Dig, Gladius Soul, Grand Dread, Hakavir Domina, Flux Out Finale. But then once you have a certain amount of Fatale, you replace the Grand Dread and Hakavir Domina with like Waro, Triyal, and Wardrow Triyal. And you do that for all of your pieces of gear. Yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.